Hello, my name is Brandon Tompkins with RE/MAX Alliance, and in this video I'm going to talk a little bit about multiple offers and how those are being dealt with by sellers. The first thing to know right off the top is that no multiple offer situation is dealt with the same way as any other. There are always different wrinkles to each scenario, to each seller's situation, and when you're on the buying side, unfortunately you're kind of at the mercy of the ebb and flow of how that particular seller is going to deal with the multiple offer situation. Oftentimes in this market, as you can imagine, when an agent sits down with a seller and sees the house and knows the price point, they can prepare that seller for the fact that a multiple offer scenario is likely. They will often bring that home on the market and then give 2 or 3 days before reviewing offers and make that known to all brokers that the house is on the market on Wednesday, and they'll make a broker note that all offers will be reviewed on Monday. That kind of helps. It's a benefit to both buyer and seller. It allows the buyers to go in, take a look at the house, get organized, do some research if they choose to, and get their offer submitted in a less than chaotic manner. And it also allows the seller to round up as many offers as possible, maybe have an open house and just do as much as they can to gather as many offers as possible. So it really is a pretty good situation. Now that being said, sometimes multiple offers come out of houses that you didn't expect them to, and sometimes they just take place and you have to deal with them as they come about. But I won't speak in this video necessarily about how I specifically deal with them, because my role when I'm the listing agent is to sit down with a seller and describe all the different ways you can potentially deal with them, and then you still kind of, as the process moves forward, you may adjust what you want to do, how you want to respond. And so it's hard to, for me on a video, just say this is how I do it, because a lot of it depends on the seller, their motivations, what they're comfortable with, and so it's kind of a dynamic situation. What I would like to do though is talk about kind of common practices and kind of how it's happening generally speaking, just so you know. And when I work with buyers, this is kind of what I tell them to be prepared for. Before we get really into the multiple offer, one thing that plays a big role in a multiple offer situation is the acceptance deadline that a buyer puts in their offer. A lot of times people say, when you put an offer in, well, when does the seller have to respond by? Well, it's not truly what that deadline means. That deadline is the time frame by which the buyer is committed to that offer as written. So if the seller is going to counter any item, whether it be price, dates, or anything in between, all of a sudden that acceptance deadline doesn't mean anything, because the seller is not agreeable to that offer exactly as written. Now, oftentimes when a house is listed and it's not on the market and then offers reviewed several days later, acceptance deadlines sometimes get abused by sellers. A buyer may try to jump in there, write an offer quick, put a short acceptance deadline in there, thinking that they're going to leverage the situation. Well, many times sellers kind of call that bluff and say, well, we know you put a deadline in there, but there's another party that wants to see it, and they're a serious buyer, and we're going to wait and see, and because the seller wants multiple offers. So and the buyer may say, well, if you don't accept it by that deadline or respond, then we're out of the running. And then again, it's up to the seller. Are they going to listen to that and adhere to that deadline? Or typically what happens is the seller just lets that deadline pass and gets another offer or two in to negotiate with. Now on the buyer side, once that deadline does pass, then they can go write another offer on another house without being tied to that offer as written on the previous house. So that's one thing to kind of get straight through the multiple offer situation, is that acceptance deadline. That's a big part of how things can work out. But let's just briefly talk about, generally speaking, seller does not have to notify buyers that there are multiple offers. Obviously, generally they do, because it helps their situation to have the buyers bump up their price or take more risk through the contract or what have you. But sometimes sellers don't. They just gather them in quietly, deal with them as they want to, and go from there. So sometimes you're part of a multiple offer situation and you don't even know it. But when you do know it, a lot of times a seller will say, okay, we do have multiple offers. I need your highest and best offer by such and such date and time. And you can either choose, if you've already submitted an offer as a buyer, you can choose to adjust it, or you can just say, no, that's our highest and best as is. Again, there are a lot of variations to all this. I'd be happy to visit with you specifically if you have any questions, or if you're thinking about selling and you think you'll be a multiple offer. Specifics, this is just generalized. But typically when a seller gets in multiple offers, they can do one of pretty much many, but one of three basic things. Number one, they can just sign the one they like the best, and that offer's under contract. Number two, they can call if there's just small tweaks within an offer that they just want to clarify. They can call and verbally counter that offer, just with those few changes, come to a verbal agreement, and then put it in writing, get it out to that agent. Or third, they may just move straight to a formal written counter offer, again probably with a short time frame, just so they can get back to their other offers. And the buyer pretty much wants the house, and they'd be willing to either agree or disagree fairly quickly. But sometimes sellers put formal written counter offers in front of one of the buyers. Now typically on the buyer side of things, you don't know maybe what's going on behind the scenes until you're either told your offer was accepted, your offer was declined, or you happen to be one of those that's in a little bit of a counter offer situation. The very specifics of what's going on is rarely communicated back to other buyers' agents by the listing agent. It's very unusual for the listing agent to call the other buyers and say, well, we have a verbal counter offer out to one of the offers that's not yours, I'll let you know. Very rare that will take place. So those are kind of the three general ways that they're handled, either signed, verbally countered, or formally countered, just through normal time frames. The thing to keep in mind, it's a frustrating thing for a buyer, is you're kind of at the mercy, like I said, if they're out putting verbal counter offers and that buyer's kind of deciding and taking their time and the seller wants to wait. As a buyer, sometimes you just have to wait until you hear something. But again, if your acceptance deadline passed as a buyer, then you can go right on another property. No problem. Your deadline is passed on your commitment to that previous offer. And the only other thing I'd mention, and I've seen it several times, is price is not the one motivating factor out there. Sellers sometimes are motivated by timing. Sometimes they have to sell and lease back the house. Sometimes they're very skittish about qualifications of buyers given financing in the market today. So they want the strongest buyer they can find, regardless of if it's a couple $1,000s lower than another offer. So there are things out there that motivate sellers other than price. I've seen it. I've been a part on both sides of that. So again, if you have any questions about multiple offers specific to you, feel free to give me a call. I'd be happy to visit with you. And thanks for watching the video.